He's going to TJC.
Hey folks, so we're continuing on with the lecture. The lecture notes are in the Google Classroom, and we're talking about the voting process. So first, states are supposed to do this. If not, if they fail, if that's why, like, if you have election problems, you're supposed to go to the state legislatures, not necessarily like the courts or anything like that, because courts don't even like getting involved with elections unless they really, really have to. All right, next one. Federal Election Commission. This came up a lot in the last election, the FEC. So the Campaign Finance and Federal Election Commission administers and enforces laws pertaining to financing of federal elections. The FEC discloses campaign finance information, so they make it public, enforces law related to limits and prohibitions on contributions. That's why a single individual is not supposed to dump beyond a certain limit, which I forgot it is, in an election, like on a candidate. But if they filter that money through other organizations, they can, as long as it looks like it's coming from more than one person. So there are ways around it. And prohibitions on contributions, and oversees public funding of presidential elections. Now, it does still happen, though, unfortunately. The presidential candidates do still receive foreign cash in their campaigns, but it's not supposed to be legal. So, the FEC has 6 members, so it's a think of it as a board. 3 from each political party, unless you're a third party, then sorry. And at least 4 votes are required for an official action, which is intended to ensure the decisions of the commission are nonpartisan. So, you have a few Republicans, a few Democrats, and if you're Green Party, Libertarian, American Party, or Constitutional Party, or one of those others, that's too bad.
I have a
Question?
Has there ever been a third party? No.
Yeah, his name was Abraham Lincoln. He was a Republican.
Oh,
They were the third party that popped up.
There was.
My man Abraham
At
Lincoln
that,
came
wasn't
from
there
Clarksville,
at
I
that
wanna say.
time the Whigs party, the Democratic, Republican, and the Republican?
Yeah, and you had
Abraham
yeah. Well, I mean,
He's a
most of
fire-
the Whigs had joined the Republicans by then, so did a lot of the know-nothings. But yeah, I mean, the Democrats kind of split, and the Republicans are the new kids on the block who weren't supposed to win anything. But because the vote was split like 4 ways, Abe came in. So,
Because
I mean, really, if Roosevelt made a third party sooner, he probably could have did it.
The Bulmers party?
Yeah, I bet if he would have done it sooner when he was super popular, he could have done it. But
Yeah, he was losing popularity by the time he made the Bulmers party. Wonder what could have been different with third party. I wonder what could have been different with like a third party in the current.
I'm not really sure because, like, whenever I think of a multi-party system, I think of Israel, where like what they do in Israel is that you don't vote for a candidate, you vote for a party, and then that party will choose the person who gets the office. And so, like, their parliament or Congress, wherever they have, has like 50 parties, right? And so, the party that gets the most vote gets to pick the prime minister, and they have a president, but the president isn't that important from what I understand. So. It's kind of like weird. What's cool about it is more differing opinions could get more of a voice, but I guess what kind of stinks about it is they're all kind of like really spread out and not in agreement. I guess I don't know. Of course, I'm glad we don't live in a parliamentarian system. Parliaments are made to make laws fast. Republics are made to make laws slow.
which is good. We like republics.
Yeah.
That's why Canada sucks. Canada's
My
trash.
All right. That's enough Canada bashing. Somebody's going to come up here and start screaming at you and say, "My father was Canadian."
Well, then I'll make him apologize since he's Canadian.
So, what's the mom from Elise? She said like how they do it is they have 2 parties, and they don't have like a president or anything. They just have those two parties, and they basically just work everything out together.
They what?
They just have,
Say that again?
they have two party leaders, two party presidents, and they basically just work everything out together.
In belief.
You know, I had a professor once, and he said for years, one project he'd have in a class like this is he'd have everybody write their own constitution, but he stopped doing it because everybody just kept copying the American Constitution. So I was like, he did it for years. Well, the students, they'd be like, I'm going to make my own constitution. They'd be like, this looks like the U.S. Constitution. I can't think of anything else.
Well, it's because the U.S. Constitution is the best
It's
constitution.
just so great.
So this is the very close to smile, speed, and not steal type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, though, even the Soviet Constitution looked a lot like ours, and it had a whole lot more rights. But the problem is that they weren't able to keep up with all the rights they promised. And they gave people so many rights, they had to take away other rights. And I don't know. They didn't live by them. All right, so let's look at the federal level. And we're going to that's going to be the focus of today. So the Department of Justice takes care, and its Civil Rights Division is the one that enforces federal election law. And so, the Department of Justice, it also has to do with like federal crime. It's led by the Attorney General, which is one of those cabinet positions for the presidency. This includes enforcing the following 4 primary federal election laws. You don't have to memorize these by their name, but you should know your rights under these. So first is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So this is during the Civil Rights Movement. This comes about when, of course, remember from your U.S. history, there was a lot of problems regarding that, especially based on race. This ensures that there is not discrimination in voting based on factors such as race, ethnicity, or language minority status. Trying to pull away from that old Jim Crow stuff, right?
Good stuff. We don't like Jim Crow in this house.
My dad's friend's name was John Crow.
Ooh.
On the trucking company.
Did y'all know that Abraham Lincoln was actually a vampire hunter?
I heard that.
What?
I heard that. That Abraham Lincoln was actually a vampire hunter.
That movie was awful.
It was not awful. The pacing was off. The pacing was off.
Awful.
I mean, I think it's the truth. I totally believe it.
Oh, I believe it too. I legitimately 100% believe that Abraham
Dude, he
Lincoln
could not
was
first
a
out.
I'm not kidding.
I want to get 2 hours of
I'm
my
not
life
kidding.
back.
Before he went
What?
I believe
to become the
it.
governor of Illinois, anybody who challenged him, he would knock out cold.
You know, Abraham Lincoln invented the choke slam. That's not even a joke. No, look
No,
that up. Look that up right now.
He did. He also invented the flat. What's it called?
The RKO.
No. He invented a type of boat that could sail easily along.
Along
It's like a
what?
flatbed boat that could actually float along like really like
Shallow bodies of water.
yeah.
I found out a fun but nasty historical fact yesterday. You know, whenever somebody says the phrase that somebody's blowing smoke up your rear, apparently in England, they thought that was the first form of CPR. And
What?
it, like swimming pools and stuff like that, they would have tobacco pipes with like tubes, and they literally thought if they blew tobacco smoke up somebody's, it would resuscitate them from drowning. And so yeah, they had like a little kit. They could get like the tobacco and like a lighter and stuff.
Oh,
I mean, they had a spirit.
It's just, well, it just goes to show where medicine was in the 1800s.
That's why I think he's.
it wasn't all that
You need to be a good wrestler too.
All right, next one. The National Voter Registration Act of 1993 facilitates voter registration. So this has to do with people registering to vote, because you have to register to vote in, most states, right? Like in Texas, you usually register to vote like when you get your driver's license renewed or something like that. It
What?
requires,
Ask what really sparked the voter registration act?
I don't know.
Because that's the same year that the Soviet Union collapsed.
This is also the same year, if I remember correctly, after Bill Clinton came to office, whenever you had a third party come up under Ross Perot, and you had Bush Sr. get knocked out of the water, and Bill Clinton picked up the lead and won the presidency. So maybe it has something to do with that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It requires all states that do not have election day voter registration, where voters can register to vote at their polling places on election, to allow voters to register by mail when they apply for a driver's license and at state public assistance agencies. So yeah, almost everybody does it when you get your driver's license renewed, right? So you just go, yeah, I'm gonna vote.
You just check a box and stuff.
They make it super easy because they don't want it to inhibit people. Another law is the Uniformed and Overseas Absentee Voting Act. This is for like military people for the most part. So Military and Overseas Voting Enfranchisement Act and facilitate voting for people serving the armed forces and citizens who live overseas, right? So like, let's say you're on a work or an education visa, you're going to school in another country to become an artist or something like that. This way you can still vote. So, know your rights. All right. The Help America Vote Act of 2002 provided funding to states for upgrading voting systems and voter registration systems, including requiring states to have statewide voter registration systems. So this is to help enforce that 1993 Act, establishing minimum voter identification standards. So they're trying to make it more stringent. And of course, this is around in the Bush years. Registering to vote, requiring voters with a registration problem the ability to cast a provisional ballot. So this is for people, like, think about, it helps out people who might be in like nursing homes and they're not able to get out to vote. So this helps out with people who have to do mail-in voting because they're just not able to get around. They can't make it for like voting day and stuff like that for different reasons.
Hey, I was born in 2002, you know?
Whoa.
Whoa. Yeah, something incredible happened the year before that. Landry was born. No, Landry was born.
Oh, that's
Oh,
so
what?
sweet.
What'd you say? No, what'd you say that?
Oh, thank you.
I said you were incredible.
Yeah, we don't have to like shout root stuff. All right. It is the 50 states that elections are governed, as we mentioned before, and the election results are certified and finalized. So if you paid attention to the last presidential election, this was a big deal. The states handled the voting, and then the state legislatures voted on certifying the votes. When they certified the votes, they then said, okay, this is legitimate, and they picked the electors that were supposed to go up to Washington to vote on this. In most states, elections are run by state official, typically the Secretary of State or Lieutenant Governor, like here in Texas. And this individual is also a partisan elected official. Well, we know that because elected officials are usually part of a political party. For example, this guy of Ohio, okay, so it could be a Democrat, Republican. They also provide guidance to local election jurisdictions in the state regarding how elections should be administered, but it's up to the states to determine these rules. Under this act, the state election official is in charge of managing the state voter registration database and for facilitating voting by individuals covered by this act. So, once again, it goes back to the states, and this goes back to that question, is the United States made up of states or the people? Well, here you see it's both. The people vote, but the states facilitate it for the Fed. At the local level, it is at the local level that the local elections office, where elections are actually administered. So, like often it's schools or old churches, community centers, that's where people usually vote. The LEO is typically a part of a county or city, and the county or city also is responsible for paying the cost of the election workers. The LEO, who was it? What's the name of your math teacher? Miss Cannon. She was one of these election officials. Miss Cannon.
You say her name too many times, she will pop up.
Miss Cannon.
Like Rumpelstiltskin?
The LEO is the place where polling locations are selected, the poll workers are hired and trained, ballots are created, voters vote, and votes are counted. After the election, the local officials are the ones who conduct a canvass, a certification that all ballots are counted and it's accurate and legit. These results are communicated to the state, where all election results receive final certification. So this is where it's happening. And then when they report it to the state, then the state will report it to like news agencies, and they might update an election map if it's a presidential election, or to the newspapers if it's something more small. And then you can like get your results at least by the next day. In the US, there are approximately, like we mentioned before, 10,499 local jurisdictions. So that's a lot to keep up with. Typical election jurisdiction has about 1,000 registered voters. However, in 2008 election, this was made in like 2009 or 2010, almost 2/3 of all voters who cast ballots in the presidential election lived in the 457 largest election jurisdictions. So that's no surprise. The ones that have the biggest impact on national elections are the most populous places. And that is only 4% of all election jurisdictions in the U.S. For example, there are more registered voters in LA County than there are in all but 8 states. In the U.S., elections are typically either run by a person elected by the voters or appointed by a board or an individual. In smaller LEOs, the election official is typically elected. In larger ones, there's relatively even split between elected and appointed officials. So the more less populated, the more democratic it is because you vote for this position. For most election officials, running elections is just one of several programs, policies they implement. So, and that's where it comes back to like the electoral college system. If it wasn't for the electoral college, Los Angeles County, New York City, Chicago, maybe Houston, a couple other places would basically run the country. But because of the electoral college system, less populated, more rural areas get to have a say-so. So there's an argument against that, however, but we can talk about that later. That's going to end it for today. If you have not finished my most recent assignment, which we just talked about last time, finish it, turn it in. Otherwise, you can use the rest of the class period for study hall, which is about 30 minutes. So.
Oh, stop touching me, dude.
I'm not touching you, fool.
Yes.
May I go fill my wife?
Yeah, I had a choke hold on my ankle just then, dude.
Joey, get a pot of hot wax and touch him. Like dip his fingers in it.
I'll do this.
Put it under his toes like that.
Yeah, put it on his toes.
I would too. I was like, dip my fingers, but I don't want my whole body cramped.
Oh, I would. That would. Just be.
I don't want to drink either.
Weird too. Imagine drinking this.
You said we wanted to be fun.
You did incredible. Who? What? What are we talking about? I'm glad you did. You did in science class. You did. You did.